So, where your focus goes, energy flows. I've been hearing this quote a lot lately, and I just looked it up, and I've heard variations of it. Another part, in addition to that quote, it says, and where energy flows, whatever you're focusing on grows, right? And a lot of people, they say that Tony Robbins, which a lot of you, I'm quite sure, are familiar with him. He's the famous public speaker, and they attribute that quote to him. And of course, those of you who understand what that quote means, simply put, whatever it is that you keep thinking about, whatever it is that you keep in the forefront of your mind, it's going to grow. So if you keep thinking about that negative thing, that thing that just keeps egging you and bothering you, that thing that just keeps messing with you, all you're going to do is just keep seeing more of that problem. But guess what? The flip side of that can happen, right? So if you keep thinking about positive things, you keep thinking about solutions, you keep thinking about ways to solve the problem, that is going to grow for you. That is what something that's going to keep coming up in the forefront of your mind, ways to solve the problem. And so that's what I wanted to just briefly come on here on my podcast, Real Reading Talk. My name is Miss Sasha, and with Real Reading Talk, I discuss the real systemic issues at the very core, the very foundation as to why we have these high levels of illiteracy in our Black communities, brown communities, underserved communities, and the ways in which we can combat these issues together. And I've been, talking about this topic on my podcast since I started in 2017. That was the name that I came up with because the whole intention was to keep it real. That's why I called it Real Reading Talk. I wanted us to be able to have a space where we could discuss these issues unapologetically. It reminds you of those, as they call it, the parking lot conversations that you have after the meeting. You know how you have a meeting, whether it's your job or school, whatever it is. And then folks, they like to talk after the meeting. That's when people feel like, okay, I'm really getting off my chest what it is that what I really, really wanted to say. And so that's the whole point of Real Reading Talk. It's the no sugarcoating, no chaser, right? You coming in with the raw of what it is. And just like I always talk about on my podcast, the foundational roots, the core of the problem that we have as it pertains to high levels of illiteracy in our communities and why we are seeing our young babies talking about they hate reading, they don't like to read, reading is too boring, it takes too long. And these are things that kids are still saying today in 2026. And there's a reason why that mindset as it pertains to literacy, why it is in the forefront of our community. And that stems from systemic racism. All right. So that's the core root. That's the problem. But just like I talk about on the podcast, I don't just want to focus on the problem. I want to focus on the solutions. You know how you've ever met that person who's always, they find a problem for every solution. Every time you try to bring up ways to fix the problem, or you try to talk about how we can, solve this, or we can do it like that. And here they come with all the negatives, Well, see, it's not going to work. And this is why. And, it's been here like this for decades. And, we all, we just got to deal with it. This is something that it's never going to go away. And that right there, that mindset, that mentality, that's why I truly believe that's one of the main reasons why we still have this issue within our community when it pertains to the high levels of illiteracy. Because just as I started with where your focus goes, your energy flows, right? So it's not even just about a person thinking that it's going to happen, that it's going to be negativity or we're not going to get rid of this problem. What also begins to happen is the self-sabotage happens. Those self-denigrating beliefs around literacy, which these are things that our young people still to this day deal with. For example, if you'll have that young person who loves to read and they're surrounded by their peers, unfortunately, that young person who loves to read and they'll be called all kind of names still. Oh, you some kind of nerd, or why, what you doing with that book? Probably trying to take the book away from them, or man, that's what them rich white kids do. You have kids who have that mentality. They think that, well, see, I'm Black and I don't have much. I live in the hood, so I shouldn't be reading no books. I should be out here just playing around uh, aimlessly all the time. Everything should, it should be doom and gloom. I should be thinking about, being a quote unquote thug or doing something that's not educational. The educational aspect, that's not something that is a part of my community. So therefore, why should I even do it? That's not something that's normalized in our communities. And so what I wanted to do, and what my intention is to do rather, is I want to make a shift because I truly believe that words are powerful. I believe that when we start to say things, just like if you are saying things to yourself, if you're saying things like, I can do it, I believe, I will, I think abundantly, I'm a great person, I attract goodness, I attract wealth, I attract integrity. When you start speaking those things to yourself, you're going to find every way possible to do things to make sure that the things that you're doing is matching what you're saying. And so I want to do a shift, right? I think it's time for a change. And so I want to change the name of my podcast. And it's something that you already are familiar with because I already was ending the podcast with this particular name. And that podcast name that I have in mind is Reading is Freedom. It just makes sense because, again, that is something that I started saying at the end of my podcast. It's actually the name, that was the phrase that I came up with in 2019 after reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And after I read that narrative and I saw his quote where he said, read his quote rather, where he said, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. I just flipped it up and bounced it and turned it around. I said, you know what? Reading is freedom. And that was a phrase I came up with in 2019 when we had our summer reading camp at Stonebrook Montessori School. I'll never forget it. Because I remember Miss Jackie, shout out to her, she was the principal at the time. And I remember her looking at the bag because I had Reading is Freedom on their little drawstring bags. And she was like, wow, she's like, Reading is Freedom. I like that. I said, yeah, and, basically, I think I had told her when the reason why I came up with the phrase, and it always stuck. And after that, I decided to create merch. So hence, in point, case in point, I have my shirt on. As you all see, the mug right there on my bookshelf. All right, so I have bags. And I'm like, reading is freedom. Because when you hear reading is freedom, to me, you already put your mind in a liberatory space. Now you're thinking about ways to be free. Well, what does freedom mean? What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, that looks like empowerment. That looks like you thinking for yourself. That looks like you being able to solve your problems. That looks like sovereignty. That looks like ownership. that looks like you going into rooms unapologetically with your flaws and all, going in as yourself. And when you think about reading, reading does all of those things for you and for me. For those of you who are readers, those of you who already love reading already, you know what that looks like. When you are reading that book and then you are just enlightening yourself with whatever it is, whatever that you're into, whatever genre that you're into, it's like you're going into another world, another space. You get to, if you're like a person who, whether you are into history, like for myself, Black history, or if you're into suspense, whatever it is, now your mind is thinking in a way where you are like, wow, man, this is like a whole new world. You're able to see and read the words, the dialogue. You get to learn about different authors' styles of writing. Now you're starting to, do more of critical thinking and problem solving. Your vocabulary starts to grow. Your insight starts to get deeper and deeper. All of these things are happening in the reading process. It is such a liberating space. And this is why I said, you know what? I need to make this switch. I need to make this change. I said, real reading talk for sure. Definitely the language of real reading talk, like I stated before, it was all about me making sure that anybody who listens to the podcast understand that I'm never going to shy away of talking about the real systemic issues, the false notion of white supremacy, why we are in this devastating issue that we have, or have this devastating or crisis that we have, rather, as it pertains to literacy, where you have, 10 to 15% of our Black fourth graders who are reading proficient. Or here, like, I've stated plenty of times, you have 66%, 67% of Cuyahoga County residents who are functionally illiterate. So they're walking around as adults, barely reading on a fourth grade level. These are real things that are happening across this nation. But like I said, where what our energy goes, where our focus goes, our energy flows, right? And so if we continue to just focus on the problem, even though with the podcast, I've always talked about solutions. That is like anybody who knows, could nobody ever say that you're listening to real reading talk and it was never solutions. No, solutions, that's the whole point. We talk about the problem and the solution. However, I still want to grow. I want to take us to the next level. I want us now to be in a space where we're always focusing on the solutions. Where anytime when we start having in our mind, when we know, for example, we come across that child or we come across that adult, we're like, man, I hate reading. I don't like to read. Immediately, our thought should be, well, let me think about how I can help them turn their mindset around. One of the first things that comes to my mind when somebody says, man, I don't like to read, or I don't know where to start, the first thing I tell them, I say, well, what do you like? What are your interests? What is it that you gravitate to? What makes you smile? What makes you happy? Oh, I love to bake. I love to paint. I love to cut hair. I love to dress. I'm a stylish person. Oh, okay. Well, there's a book. If you're into cutting hair, I'm talking to a little kid. Well, there's a book called JD and the Gray Barber Battle. Oh, really? Yeah. It's a book about a little 8-year-old boy who has a problem. His mom gave him a jacked up haircut. Wasn't intentionally. She loving on her son. She doing the best she can. She wanted him to be cool for his first day of school, first day of third grade. And she didn't hook it up. But guess what? In that book, it shows how this little boy was doing everything he possibly could do to solve the problem that he had, which was the bad haircut. And guess what? He did. He did everything he could to fix his own hair, and then he decided to cut his hair. Next thing you know, he realized that he has a God given gift, which is to cut hair, and he does it flawlessly. And this right here, these are the moments that make me smile and just beam and just get all giddy. Because now what we're doing, we are making a shift. The mindset automatically, instead of us just going diving in and going down the problem rabbit hole, which of course, whatever it is that you talk about, whatever it is when it comes to you talking about a solution, obviously you're going to talk about the problem, but we know the problem, right? We know the problem. High levels of illiteracy, 61% of homes, low income homes, they don't have books. We know these problems, right? But the solutions have to be in the forefront of our minds. That's what freedom looks like. That's what abundance looks like. Because when you're so used to lack, when you're so used to always seeing yourself down, and you're down on the totem pole, if you will, you're always behind the eight ball, all of these things, right? It kind of clouds your vision when it comes to you thinking about solutions, because your energy is so focused on the problem. And it's harder for you to come up with solutions. And then you wind up becoming one of those people who, again, like I stated before, finding a problem for every solution. You'll be that person anytime somebody says, oh, let's do this. They're like, oh, no, see, no, that's not going to work. If we go that way, then it's going to be potholes. Then didn't you say that you had to do this? Or you might run out of gas. Or, I think it's going to start thunderstorming. Or you may trip over, the cracks in the road. They have all, you're like, dang, man. And then you wind up talking yourself out of solving the problem because you keep thinking about the problem so much. And that's where you start breeding that whole negative Nancy mindset or hopeless highway mindset. And we're not a hopeless people. And that's why it's important for us, even when we're studying, just like I think about one of the quotes that I love by John Henrik Clarke. And he said, if we start our history with slavery, then everything else will look like progress. We can't start our history with the ASS whoopings, with we were in chains and shackles and we was born on the ships and, the holes of the ships and we was beaten. Because when you do that, your mindset starts with lack. And that's just not true. Our history does not start with that. Yes, our history got disrupted and interrupted and dismembered because of that. But we come from abundance. And when we understand that anybody who wants to oppress people and keep them in a position of lack, and they don't want to see them grow, what does that say about that person or that group of people? That says that they actually have a lack mindset. They actually have a mindset of doom and gloom, because what makes them feel good is seeing you suffer. And so what has happened is the oppressor has shifted that. They put the mindset, that lack and that oppressive mindset, and that, oh my God, what am I going to do? And we have to hoard and everything is competition and no collaboration. They flip that and they put it on us. And that's why we have the situation that we have now in the Black community, where we have things like, we'll say things like we lack trust. It's harder for us to, build together. It's harder for us to thrive. And it starts with the mind, though. If our mindset is not thinking about freedom and liberation, it's always thinking about the problem, then the problem is what is going to grow. So that's why I said, okay, you know what? I'm ready to make that change. I need to step it up. I need to go to the next level. And that next level is reading is freedom because that's what it's about. I want us to think about how reading, how literacy is going to get us in a position to where we are empowered, we have abundant mindsets, we can collaborate, we can work together, we can build, we can be sovereign, we can govern ourselves. All of these things that our people, our ancestors were already doing anyway. Our children should know about Mansa Musa and Sundiata Ali. And they should know about Queen Amina. They should know about these wonderful Queen Nzinga, all of these beautiful African kings and queens and different civilizations throughout history where Black people, brown people, where we were actually governing ourselves, we were thriving because we understood that this is God's, Allah's earth. And we can do anything that we put our minds to. We have to have a limitless mindset, especially for those of my people who are of faith and we understand that we worship the one who is limitless. There's a verse in the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims. And that verse, we believe, is the first verse, and the Arabic word for verse is ayah. We believe that first ayah that was revealed to our beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings of God, of Allah be upon him. And that ayah was read, Iqra. Read in the name of thy Lord. And the reason why that's so powerful for us is because reading is the gateway to our liberation. Reading and learning and writing, all of those things is what we need in order for us to grow our communities, in order for us to build our nations. And that's why it is extremely important for us to show our children continuously, consistently, the value of reading, the value of us learning, normalizing that, writing as well, reading and writing. I try to say that more often because a lot of our youth, and then we know that, especially in this age of the typing, and the scrolling and all of that, a lot of our youth, they're lacking writing skills. And writing is something that we should be doing consistently. Yes, we have our devices. We have things now where you can talk in the devices and you can and the things type things for you, and that's okay. Of course, the technology is there. It's as an aid, right? Because there are some people, they need that technology. They need that type of assistance. However, just like we understand with the computer, the first computer, like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing talked about, the first computer is our brain. We need to make sure that we are nurturing it, we're cultivating it. And that's why it's important for us to keep reading and doing things like writing as well, because as the saying goes, if you don't use it, you what? You lose it. And so again, I believe you guys get the point. I drove the point home. But so, yes, that's my intention to change the name of the podcast now to Reading is Freedom. All right, you guys. So I thank you all for listening to another episode of formerly Real Reading Talk to Reading is Freedom. And please remember to keep reading for at least 30 minutes a day. Y'all take care. Peace. All right, everybody. So I thank you all again for listening to another episode of Reading is Freedom. Yes, indeed, you guys. I'm super excited for this journey of mine, this new evolution, if you will, this growth period, right? I think it's time. You know how you go through those periods, you're like, you know what, it's time to make a change, So I thank you all for listening to another episode, my very first one with the new name, Reading is Freedom. And of course, the logo, all of that stuff is, oh man, it is coming. It's definitely coming. I'm super excited. And I hope you guys are feeling me, you're feeling it. And I hope that you all are, still doing everything that you can in your homes, in your communities, wherever you are, to keep championing the aspect of us reading all of the time, whether you are reading a physical book or whether you are listening to a book, whether you're reading some articles on your phone. Please make sure that you're getting that reading in. As I'm reminding you, I'm definitely reminding myself first. I have been hearing folks say things like, I don't have time to read. I got to make time to read. And and it's like, if we can make time to Netflix and chill, okay, or Hulu and chill, whatever it is you into, we can make time to crack open a book. Even, I don't care if it's your favorite romance novel or suspense, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be something where you're like reading something heavy to where like, man, I gotta like keep going over this over and over. Oh, start off with something that you just want to just be entertained by. But the whole point is that through the practice, mastery will begin to settle in. And that's what we want. We want it to become part of our muscle memory, us reading all of the time. And it's also us modeling for our youth that we believe that reading is extremely important. All right. So again, I thank you all for listening. And remember to please keep reading for at least 30 minutes a day. And yes, indeed, y'all, reading is freedom. Peace.